Here's the truth nobody really tells you. You can build the strongest muscles in the world, and it still won't matter if the frame underneath them is crumbling. Muscle sits on bone, and bone is the scaffolding everything else is built on. If that foundation is weak, the whole structure is at risk, no matter how impressive it looks on the outside. So today, we're going deep into bone health. I'll walk you through 8 steps based on the research that can help protect your bones and in many cases, help start reversing the damage that's already been done. Stick around for step 3, because there's a popular habit millions of people over 50 do every single day, thinking it's helping their bones, when there's real evidence it might actually be working against them. Let's get into it. Step 1. What's really happening inside your bones? Most people think a bone is just there. Hard, solid, permanent, done. Set it and forget it. But that's not even close to the truth. Your bones are alive. Right now, as you're watching this, your body is breaking down old bone tissue and rebuilding new bone tissue every single day of your life. It's a constant renovation project happening inside you, whether you're aware of it or not. And bone isn't just calcium either, even though that's the first thing most of us think of. About half of your bone is actually protein, mostly something called collagen, which acts like a flexible scaffold that the hard minerals attach themselves to. Think of collagen as the rebar inside concrete. Without it, the structure has no flexibility and it becomes brittle. Now, there are 2 conditions you need to understand here. Osteopenia is the early stage where bone density starts dropping below what's considered normal. Osteoporosis is the more advanced stage where bone has become porous and fragile enough that even a small bump, a cough, or a minor fall can cause a fracture. And here's a number that might genuinely surprise you. More than half of women over 50 have some degree of osteopenia. A significant number of men do too, even though we rarely hear about it the same way. This isn't some rare condition that happens to other people. This is most of us, just sitting quietly in the background, waiting to be noticed. Step 2, the mineral most people forget. When people think about bone health, they think calcium. That's it, end of story. Case closed. But there's another mineral doing massive work inside your skeleton, and almost nobody ever talks about it: phosphorus. Here's the number that should grab your attention. About 85% of all the phosphorus in your entire body is stored inside your bones. That's not a small supporting role, that's a major structural component. And here's the twist that makes this interesting. Too little phosphorus can absolutely weaken your bones. But too much phosphorus, especially from certain sources, can also contribute to bone loss. The biggest culprits here are things like soda and heavily processed foods loaded with phosphoric acid additives. The good news is, for most people, this isn't something you need to obsess over. Phosphorus is naturally present in meat, fish, eggs, dairy, and even vegetables, so most people get plenty without even trying. The people who tend to run into trouble are usually the ones drinking a lot of soda, relying heavily on processed convenience food, or dealing with underlying kidney issues that throw the whole mineral balance off. Step 3, the calcium mistake everyone makes. Here's where things get really uncomfortable. If a doctor tells you that your bone density is low, the instinct is obvious. Take more calcium. Problem solved, right? Not exactly. There's something researchers call the calcification paradox. People with weaker, more porous bones often show higher levels of calcium buildup in places it should not be. Places like the walls of arteries and around joints. The calcium isn't disappearing, it's simply going to the wrong address, out of the bone and into soft tissue, where it can cause real problems. And there's a second issue. Many supplements use calcium carbonate. It's cheap and everywhere, but at its core, it's essentially limestone, crushed up rock. Your body has to go through roughly 12 separate biochemical steps just to absorb it. 12 steps for one mineral. And as we get older, We simply don't have enough stomach acid left to break that down. Without enough stomach acid, you can't properly absorb calcium, magnesium, or phosphorus. So you could be taking your supplement faithfully every single day and barely absorbing any of it. Simply taking more calcium isn't the answer on its own. The real question is, once that calcium is in your bloodstream, what decides where it actually ends up? That brings us to the two nutrients that make that decision. Step 4, the vitamin almost nobody gets enough of. This one is, in my opinion, one of the most underrated nutrients when it comes to bone health. Full stop. Vitamin K2. It was only identified relatively recently in the broader scope of nutrition science, and most people have genuinely never even heard of it. Here's what makes it so important. Vitamin K2 acts almost like a traffic controller for calcium. It activates specific proteins whose job is to pull calcium out of your bloodstream and direct it into your bones, while simultaneously helping keep it out of your arteries. You'll find vitamin K2 concentrated in fatty animal foods, things like egg yolks, full-fat cheese, and liver. It also shows up in certain fermented foods, especially a traditional Japanese food called natto, which has some of the highest concentrations found anywhere in nature. Here's the problem. If you've been following a low-fat diet for years, vitamin K2 is one of the very first things you start missing, simply because it's a fat-soluble nutrient that travels with dietary fat. And certain very common medications, including some cholesterol-lowering drugs and blood thinners, can interfere with how your body uses it. Step 5. The vitamin that makes calcium work. Vitamin K2 doesn't operate alone, it needs a partner. And that partner is vitamin D3. Vitamin D3's main job in this story is absorption. Without enough vitamin D, your body simply cannot absorb the calcium you're eating, no matter how much of it is on your plate. And here's the part that catches people off guard. Because most of us now live and work indoors, vitamin D deficiency has become incredibly common, even in places with plenty of sunshine. This is exactly why I always recommend getting a simple blood test to check your vitamin D levels. It's one of the cheapest, easiest things you can check, and it has a massive impact on whether everything else in this video actually works. Think of it like this. Vitamin D3 opens the door and lets calcium into your bloodstream in the first place. Then vitamin K2 grabs that calcium once it's there and escorts it into your bones where it actually belongs. One without the other leaves the entire job half finished. Step 6. The overlooked vitamin for bone health. There's a third fat-soluble nutrient that doesn't get nearly enough attention in this conversation, vitamin A. Specifically the form called retinol, which is the active, ready-to-use form your body can put to work directly. You'll find this concentrated in egg yolks, liver, and other organ meats. Vitamin A supports the bone remodeling process we talked about back in step 1. And getting it from whole foods is generally considered the safer approach, rather than relying on high-dose isolated supplements. And since vitamin D, 3, K2, and A are all fat-soluble, your body needs a healthy gallbladder and liver to produce enough bile to absorb them properly in the first place. If you've had your gallbladder removed, or you're dealing with something like a fatty liver, that absorption step can become a hidden bottleneck, even if your diet is otherwise perfect. Step 7. Protein, minerals, and daily targets. Let's get specific here because numbers matter. Remember how we said about half of your bone is protein, mostly collagen? Well, if you're not eating enough protein, your body has a backup plan, and that backup plan is raiding your bone stores to get what it needs. So a good daily target is somewhere around 1.5 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of your ideal body weight. For calcium, the daily target most research points to is somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 milligrams. And you don't need to get this all from pills. A bowl of strained yogurt can give you around 300 milligrams on its own. Bone-in canned salmon, bok choy, mushrooms, prunes, and figs are all rich sources too. Beyond that, you've got the trace minerals working quietly in the background. Magnesium helps activate vitamin D and works alongside calcium within bone tissue. Zinc, copper, and boron help activate the same proteins that calcium and vitamin K2 depend on. You'll find a lot of these in leafy greens, nuts, seeds, and shellfish. Step 8. How bones actually get stronger. Here's something most people have never heard of, and it might be the single most important concept in this entire video. Wolff's Law. Deep inside your bone, there are cells called osteocytes. When mechanical force pushes down on your bones, fluid moves around these cells, and they send out a signal that essentially says, reinforce this area. We need more strength here. Your bone literally responds to the load you put on it. But here's the catch. Research suggests bone responds best to forces around 4 times your body weight. And walking, even brisk walking, generates roughly 1.5 times your body weight. Running gets you to around 2.5 times. Neither one, on its own, reaches that golden zone. So what does? Something as simple as stepping down off a low step in a controlled way, creating a brief, manageable impact, can help bridge that gap. Now layer resistance training on top of this. Your muscles and bones are cousins in this system. When a muscle contracts against resistance in movements like squats, deadlifts, or lunges, it pulls on the bone through the tendon. Your bone registers that pull as load and responds by getting stronger. In other words, strength training is bone training. The most strategic areas to focus on are your lower body and core, the glutes, quads, hamstrings, and the deep core muscles, because these are the muscles that protect your hips and spine, the 2 areas where a fracture causes the most serious complications. Now let's talk about hormones. Around menopause, there's a sharp drop in estrogen, and estrogen plays a major direct role in maintaining bone density. This is a big part of why bone loss often accelerates so noticeably during and after menopause. And there's one more factor that quietly undermines everything we've talked about: chronic inflammation. Constant high stress, smoking, excessive alcohol, and poor diet all directly sabotage the bone-building process. Reducing inflammation isn't a side note here, it's part of the foundation. So let's bring all of this together. Bone health isn't about one magic mineral, it's a system. Calcium needs vitamin D, K2, vitamin A, protein, and trace minerals to actually work. And it needs resistance training to tell your body it's worth maintaining. But every step you take today compounds. If this video helped you, let me know in the comments which step surprised you the most. Share this with someone who needs to see the full picture. Stay strong and see you in the next video.